If the Duchess of Sussex's long-anticipated Hollywood homecoming truly becomes a solo coronation, one is forced to wonder whether the prince who sacrificed everything will find himself relegated to the role of a permanent, or perhaps merely decorative, spectator in the wings. We are told, with a quite remarkable frequency of late, that the Duchess is being positively bombarded with acting offers, ranging from leading roles in glossy romantic comedies to, perhaps more tellingly, the lurid world of soap operas and even horror films. A well-placed source tells me that the whispers in Los Angeles suggest she is being viewed as something of a unicorn by desperate studio executives, not for any newfound depth in her craft, mind you, but for the sheer unadulterated noise her name generates, which apparently translates into tens of millions in investment capital for those willing to roll the dice. One can almost see the gears turning behind the scenes as her team leaks these reports of a Hollywood scramble, framing it as a triumphant return to her roots, even as her brief cameo alongside Brie Larson in a recent production suggests a career pivoting more toward self-parody than serious dramatic weight. There is a palpable sense that this is less a career comeback and more a calculated repositioning of the Sussex brand, one where the Duchess title is stripped of its royal duty and polished into a mere marketing asset for the highest bidder, leaving the monarchy's dignity as little more than a footnote in a casting director's spreadsheet. However, behind the carefully curated headlines of a Hollywood bidding war, a source within the inner circle describes an atmosphere at the Montecito estate that is far less harmonious than the PR machine would have us believe. While she prepares for her close-up, the domestic foundations are reportedly trembling, with a revolving door of household staff and nannies, some 25 by the latest count, fleeing what has been described by those on the ground as an insufferable and dehumanizing management style. This frantic, high-pressure environment is only exacerbated by the resurfacing of the Duke's past indiscretions, specifically those rather embarrassing flirty messages to a journalist from his bachelor days that have, quite predictably, left the Duchess fuming and the household in a state of frosty silence. It is a classic case of the mask slipping. While the world is invited to watch a star being supposedly reborn, those tasked with maintaining the illusion of their domestic bliss are finding the reality of life behind the gates to be a bridge too far. The inner monologue of the Duchess at this moment is likely one of frantic overcompensation, a desperate need to secure her own legacy before the cracks in her personal narrative become too wide for even the most expensive publicist to paper over. And then there is the matter of the prince himself, who appears increasingly like a man who has traded his crown for a lifetime of carrying his wife's train through the backlots of Burbank. As she eyes a solo spotlight, someone close to palace circles suggests that Harry is finding himself in a state of profound professional and emotional displacement, a spare not just to the throne he abandoned, but to the very life he helped build in California. Even their upcoming business excursion to Australia, which is already sparking a predictable firestorm of resentment over security costs and taxpayer involvement, seems more like a desperate attempt to maintain global relevance than a coherent strategy for their future. One cannot help but observe the irony. A man who gave up everything for a partnership now finds that partnership evolving into a solo act, leaving him to navigate a world that values his wife's celebrity while viewing his own presence as a somewhat cumbersome, if occasionally useful, accessory. The surrounding atmosphere is one of immense pressure as they attempt to justify their existence outside the royal fold, yet the long-term consequences of this professional separation suggest a marriage that is becoming less of a union and more of a strategic alliance that is beginning to fray at the edges. The skepticism regarding this supposed avalanche of deals is not merely my own. Many behind closed doors are questioning if these offers are even real, or simply a sophisticated narrative shift to mask the fact that Hollywood's elite has begun to avoid them. If these reports of being bombarded were true, one might expect a slate of prestigious projects rather than the whispers of soap operas and low-budget horror that currently populate the rumor mill. There is a cynicism here that is hard to ignore. The idea that she is using her former co-stars to seed the ground for a return that the industry isn't actually asking for. It creates a frantic energy within their Montecito walls, a sense of a deadline approaching where they must either succeed on their own terms or face the cold reality of irrelevance. For Harry, the emotional cost of watching his wife build a world that essentially excludes him must be staggering. Yet he remains tethered to this path, a reluctant traveler in a journey that seems to have no room for his own identity. Before we continue, take a second to subscribe. These videos don't always get recommended, and this way you won't miss the next one. The skepticism surrounding this supposed avalanche of Hollywood interest is not merely my own, for many behind closed doors are beginning to question whether these bombardments of offers are a genuine reflection of talent or a sophisticated narrative shift to mask a rather cold reality. A senior casting agent in Los Angeles has gone as far as to label the Duchess a unicorn, though one suspects the term refers less to her mythical acting prowess and more to the stratospheric attention and investment capital her name might pry from desperate studio executives. Despite the breathless reports of leading roles in everything from glossy rom-coms to the rather desperate depths of soap operas and horror films, one can almost sense the frantic internal monologue within the Montecito walls. A woman who, as a source within the inner circle suggests, hates feeling on the outside and is desperate to prove her worth independently of the royal institution she so publicly rejected. This sudden scramble for relevance feels less like a natural career progression and more like a high-stakes gamble in the ruthless transactional boardrooms of Hollywood, where the novelty of a title is a currency that devalues with every passing month of inactivity. The atmosphere surrounding these solo professional maneuvers is increasingly characterized by a palpable exclusion of the Duke, as the once inseparable salt and pepper of the Sussex brand appear to have reached a significant professional crossroads. While the Duchess orchestrates meetings and takes toe-dip cameos in projects like the upcoming Amazon film Close Personal Friends, a well-placed source notes a growing realization in industry circles that the Duke lacks the commercial experience necessary to navigate this new, glittery terrain. There is a quiet, almost clinical efficiency to the way the Duchess is reportedly distancing herself from their joint Netflix ventures, having allegedly refused to act in their projects despite a multi-million-dollar commitment, as she pivots toward her own lifestyle brand and independent screen presence. The surrounding pressure to maintain their lavish lifestyle while their professional paths diverge is creating a domestic vacuum where the long-term consequences of this professional separation may very well result in a marriage that is viewed by the public as more of a strategic alliance than a unified partnership. One must also consider the rather curious timing of these leaks, appearing just as the public begins to tire of the repetitive royal grievances that have been the couple's primary export for years. A source behind closed doors whispers that the internal mood at Netflix has shifted toward fatigue, with executives blunt about being done with the royal narrative, forcing the Duchess into this radical reinvention as a solo act. The inner pressure to succeed is immense. She is no longer just competing with other actresses for roles, but with her own previous identity as a senior royal, a transformation that many in the industry find more than a little cynical. If this Hollywood homecoming is indeed the reset her team claims, it is one being built upon the foundation of her husband's increasing professional redundancy, a move that places a staggering emotional and reputational cost on a man who seems to have exchanged a life of duty for a role as an uncredited extra in his wife's personal drama. While the Duchess of Sussex seemingly accelerates her solitary ascent into the Hollywood firmament, one cannot help but observe the increasingly stark isolation of the prince who once stood as her equal partner. A source behind closed doors whispers that the Duke is currently grappling with a profound sense of professional and emotional displacement, privately describing himself as lost and hollowed out in a world that seems to have very little use for a prince without a purpose. It is a bitter irony that in his quest for freedom, he appears to have merely traded one hierarchy for another. Where he was once the spare to his brother, he now finds himself cast as a supporting character in the grand production of his wife's solo ambitions. The surrounding atmosphere in Montecito is said to be one of mounting restlessness, as the lack of an institutional structure or military community has left him unmoored and increasingly disconnected from the very life he helped build across the Atlantic. One imagine his internal monologue is a turbulent mix of homesickness and frustration, realizing that the bold new path he promised has led him into a quiet, gilded shadows, where his presence is often treated as an optional accessory. The professional separation that is now so visible to the public is, according to someone close to palace circles, the result of a man who has reached a definitive breaking point with the entire entertainment industry. We are told that while Meghan is energized by her new lifestyle brand and return to acting, Harry has become blunt about being done with the tawdry business of celebrity and the constant scramble for commercial relevance. There is a palpable sense of friction as their paths diverge. She is marching forward with a calculated game plan, while he appears to be retreating toward the only things that ever gave him genuine grounding, his charitable work and the Invictus Games. This divergence is creating a domestic vacuum where the shared vision that once bound them together is being replaced by a stark reality where they are operating in entirely different spheres. The pressure is intensifying as he watches her find traction in a world he no longer wishes to inhabit, leading to an atmosphere of quiet, henpecked resentment that is becoming increasingly difficult for their publicists to ignore. The long-term consequences of this displacement suggest a future where the Duke may be forced to make a remarkably difficult choice regarding his own standing and sanity. A source within the inner circle reveals that Harry is beginning to fear that every month spent in California is a sunk cost, squandering the last of his royal credibility on ventures that yield neither influence nor personal satisfaction. There are even whispers that he is contemplating a hard decision, perhaps involving a semi-permanent relocation to Europe or Portugal, even if it means a period of living apart while he attempts to rebuild his fractured identity. It is a tragic trajectory for a man who sacrificed his birthright for a partnership that now seems to thrive most when he is out of the frame. The reality of being a Hollywood +1 is a far cry from the life of service he once knew, and the emotional toll of this realization is likely to define the next chapter of this increasingly fractured Sussex narrative. The veneer of the united Sussex front is not merely cracking. It is, by all accounts, being systematically dismantled by the sheer suffocating weight of a lifestyle that requires a staggering £5 million a year just to keep the lights on and the security detail at the gate. A longtime family acquaintance describes the atmosphere within their Montecito walls as one of extreme tension, where the romantic idealism of their early days has been replaced by the cold, hard reality of a business model that is rapidly unraveling before their very eyes. With major media deals having largely dried up and no fresh book offers on the horizon to replenish the coffers, the financial pressure is mounting to a point where even the most loyal courtiers are beginning to sound the alarm about the stability of the marriage itself. One can imagine the Duke's growing panic as he realizes that his roles with various coaching and travel firms are nowhere near sufficient to cover their eye-watering mortgage payments and staffing costs, which are estimated to exceed hundreds of thousands of pounds annually. The long-term consequences of this fiscal hemorrhaging suggest a desperate scramble for survival, one that may force the prince back toward the very institution he once so publicly sought to escape, not as a working royal, but as a man looking for a financial lifeline. This financial strain is only further exacerbated by the rather embarrassing state of the Duchess's lifestyle brand, as ever, which appears to be stumbling toward a total standstill despite the frantic PR efforts to frame it as a success. A well-placed source tells me that far from being the next Martha Stewart, the Duchess is currently presiding over a staggering £16 million worth of unsold inventory, including tens of thousands of jars of jam and much-derided flour sprinkles that are reportedly being given away for free just to clear the warehouse shelves. The internal monologue of a woman so defined by her perceived Midas touch must be one of intense frustration and disbelief as she watches her products gather dust while her husband's own charitable ventures fail to fill the Sussex coffers. The surrounding atmosphere of professional failure is driving a wedge between the two as they find themselves pulled in irrevocably opposite directions. She, doubling down on the California dream, and he, increasingly consumed by regret and a desire to return to the stability of the United Kingdom. It is a classic case of ambition colliding with reality, where the breadwinner dynamic has shifted so violently that the partnership has become a theater of quiet, simmering competition for the remaining scraps of global relevance. Ultimately, the business of being Harry and Meghan is proving to be far more precarious than either of them anticipated when they first boarded that flight for freedom. A source behind closed doors suggests that the professional separation we are seeing, with Harry conducting solo tours across the globe while Meghan prepares for a solo screen comeback, is a deliberate move to leverage his existing fan base and shield him from the bad press surrounding her failing content ideas. There is a palpable sense of a twin-track approach where they are essentially leading separate lives, both geographically and emotionally, as the question of his return to Britain becomes the ultimate fault line in their relationship. The pressure to maintain the illusion of a united front is becoming insufferable, and many insiders warn that 2026 is the definitive make-or-break year where they must either reconcile with their choices or watch their entire enterprise fracture beyond repair. For the Duchess, the prospect of returning to the UK is attached to her most painful memories, but for the Duke, it represents the only path back to a life of genuine duty, leaving their marriage caught in the crossfire of two very different and very desperate anxieties. One can almost hear the rhythmic ticking of a clock echoing through the polished halls of Montecito, as the Duchess prepares for what many in the industry are calling her final high-stakes gamble for global relevance. A well-placed source suggests that while the narrative of being bombarded with offers serves her immediate PR needs, the internal reality is one of profound anxiety, where the failure of her joint ventures has left her with little choice but to pivot toward a solo career that may well be the final nail in the coffin of the Sussex brand. Behind closed doors, the atmosphere is described as electric with a frantic kind of ambition as she prepares for her cameo in the upcoming Amazon film Close Personal Friends, alongside Brie Larson, a move that someone close to palace circles views as a desperate attempt to recapture a professional identity that she abandoned nearly a decade ago for a title she now appears to find increasingly burdensome. One imagines her internal monologue as one of calculated survival, a belief that if she can only secure that one career-defining role, she can finally emerge from the shadow of the monarchy and the spare identity that has come to define her husband. The long-term consequences of this solo coronation are stark. If she succeeds as a Hollywood entity in her own right, the prince becomes not a partner in a global movement, but a relic of a past life that no longer fits the glittering commercial future she is so determined to build. The pressure on the Duke, meanwhile, has reached a fever pitch as he navigates the fallout of his family's latest scandals, most notably the arrest of Prince Andrew earlier this year, while being instructed by his wife to maintain a safe, sterile distance from the very relatives he remains quietly desperate to support. A source within the inner circle reveals that Harry is finding the emotional cost of this isolation to be nearly unbearable, particularly as their upcoming business trip to Australia in mid-April 2026 is already being met with fierce resistance from a public that resents paying for the security of two individuals who have traded duty for a series of high-priced speaking engagements. There is a palpable sense of irony here. The prince who sought to escape the goldfish bowl of royal life now finds himself on a stage where the tickets cost upwards of $1,500, yet his voice is increasingly drowned out by the noise of his wife's solo professional maneuvers. One can almost see the heavy weight of regret in his eyes as he prepares for their visit to the Commonwealth, realizing that he is being used as a royal footstool for a commercial enterprise that views his heritage as little more than a marketing hook for a dwindling audience. The surrounding atmosphere is further poisoned by the reality of their financial commitments, with the staggering costs of their California lifestyle creating a domestic environment where every professional move is scrutinized for its immediate return on investment. A source behind closed doors whispers that the tension between them regarding their divergent paths has created a frosty silence that even their most expensive publicists struggle to explain away, as Meghan focuses on her lifestyle brand, As Ever, and her return to the screen, while Harry appears increasingly done with the tawdry world of celebrity. The long-term consequences of this professional separation suggest a future where the Sussexes exist as a couple in name only, two individuals whose primary connection is the shared maintenance of a brand that is rapidly losing its luster in both London and Los Angeles. For Harry, the realization that he has exchanged a life of history and purpose for a supporting role in a Hollywood reinvention drama is likely the most bitter pill of all, leaving him to wonder if the freedom he so famously fought for was merely a change of masters. Ultimately, the tragedy of the current situation lies in the profound mismatch between their aspirations and the reality of the public's fading interest in their grievances. While the Duchess may indeed find a new audience in the flickering light of a streaming service, the prince remains tethered to a world he can neither return to nor fully escape, a man caught between a family that has moved on and a wife who is busy building a world that does not require his participation. The reflection we are left with is one of a once unbreakable alliance that has been hollowed out by the very ambition that was supposed to sustain it, leaving us to watch as the final act of this Sussex drama plays out in the cold, transactional glare of the Hollywood spotlight. It is a sobering reminder that while one can trade a crown for a career, the cost of that exchange is often measured in the loss of the very identity that made the career possible in the first place. Leave your thoughts below. I read every word you write, and if you value this unvarnished look at the monarchy, do ensure you are subscribed and share this with those who appreciate the truth.